Gentlemen, welcome. This is Jackson with the Chicago Kodiaks, and I thought I'd spend a few minutes here in the off season, at least off season for most of us, going over how the out of the park baseball finances system works. And the reason I decided to do this is started poking around and asking a few general questions to the league, and noticed that there seemed to be a fair amount of um, inconsistency in the answers. And it seems like different people were thinking about the finances in different ways. And I thought it'd be beneficial to all of us if we understand how the financial model works, and so that we can be a little more informed about the decisions we make and how they are going to affect our ability to create a team down the road or create a winning team down the road. So, what are we going to talk about? And this is where Cleric's going to go ahead and sign off. I get the feeling he's not a PowerPoint guy. But we'll get into the app in a minute. We'll get into the software in a moment and take a look at some of these things. But let's take a look at why is this important? What are the questions we ask ourselves as they relate to our finances? And what are the kind of the basic findings or answers that I've come up with to those basic questions, and how does it all fit together? Namely, how does cash and budget, and ultimately how those two combine together to understand how much money you have to work with. So ultimately, it boils down to: do I have enough money to build a $100 million team? If we're going to go for the gold, we're probably going to want to spend every penny to get there. And the only real question we have as it relates to finances is, will I ever be constrained to the point where I can't spend $100 million? And if so, what are the factors at play that are going to constrain me from getting there? And so another way to look at that question is saying, well, will the decisions I make now restrict my spending in the future? And so that kind of breaks down into lower priority questions, namely, what's up with my budget? How does it affect my spending? What gets included in cap spending? And how do I put it all together? So in summary, the way I would describe the system is that cash is king. It's the most important metric you have. It's the most important data point you have, and you should be thinking about it and you should be managing it. And the next most important metric is budget. The two work together closely. In fact, all the numbers that matter are a combination of cash and budget. At the end of the day, the budget is a lump sum that's given to you each year by your owner to spend on your team. However, if the budget is below 100 million and you want to spend, and then we'll use the Kodiaks as an example. My budget this year was 92 million. But I've been able to go over that budget. And the reason I was able to go over that budget is because I have cash. So in other words, the financial model has been set up where you are given a budget by your owner, but you do have the discretion to go over that budget if you have cash and you're able to do that. So let's talk about budget. Your budget number is assigned completely by owner discretion. So every year, your owner is going to tell you what you're allowed to spend on the team, or what the budget that he's going to give you to spend on the team. And that, I think we all know through experience that budget goes up and down. It correlates to the success of your team. So if you're crushing it and people are paying a lot of money to watch your games and your team is just rolling around in money, your owner is going to increase your budget to above 100 million most likely. However, if for whatever reason things are taking a downturn, your owner may decide to bring that budget down, maybe even below the 100 million mark. So what does that lump sum that your owner gives you, what does that cover? So it covers payroll. And I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that there's two components of payroll. Number one, there's your active payroll, which is what gets covered by the cap, or rather what gets counted against the cap. And that answers the question of what goes against cap. And that's the only thing that goes against cap, is the amount of money that you're spending your players that are on the field. And then you've got inactive payroll. So that's payroll that you're still paying uh, salaries for guys that you cut, right? So if you cut an expensive player last year and you didn't choose to, and you chose to spread his payments out over the remainder of his contract, it will count against your. They don't call it inactive payroll. We'll take a look at it in game in a moment. But essentially, it's inactive payroll. But that does count against your budget. So if I cut a guy that's making 10 million a year this year, and he's got 2 more years in his contract, and I get $100 million budget, 10 million of that is going to get allocated to that player immediately. Okay, so that's first and foremost payroll, both active and inactive. Scouting. So scouting is usually between 5 and 15 million, but whatever you allocate to scouting comes out of your budget. And then finally, staff expenses. Although that's very straightforward, we don't have coaches in this league, but we do have the scout. So whatever you're paying your scout comes out of the budget as well. So those are the three main line items that come out of your budget. So how much money do you need, right? I mean, how do you know if, when you get given a budget where you basically don't have to worry about money? Well, let's just be aggressive here. Let's assume that our payroll is going to be 100 million. Let's assume that on average we have about 5 million in dead payroll, right? These are the contracts that we're spending, or the money that we're allocating to players that are no longer on our team, people that we cut. That's another aggressive number, but I'm trying to get to a number where to basically say if you're at or above this number, you don't have to worry about cashing, or rather, you don't have to worry about how much you're spending. Essentially, let's say you've got your scouting maxed out at 15 million, and then you pay your scout $1 million a year. That means that your expenses are 121 million a year. So if your budget in this game, in our league, with our current setup, if you have a budget of around 120 million, you can essentially consider yourself home free in terms of being able to spend whatever you want to spend that season. Okay. So let's talk about cash and how it works. This is really straightforward. I almost feel silly explaining this, but I think it's important to understand. So the magic formula is whatever cash balance you started at the beginning of the year, you add profits or subtract losses you made that year, and then you get your ending cash balance. And then cash is capped at 40 million. So if you start the year at 30 million, let's take a look at some examples. So if you start the year at 35 million, you make a $10 million profit, you end up with 45 million. Your owner will take 5 million of that off the top, and you'll start next season with 40 million. And then clearly on the other side, if you lose $10 million, then your cash balance will be reduced to 25 million. That's what you'll start next season with from a cash perspective. I don't know if owners ever give cash. I have had that happen in single player games where your owner will, I guess, feel sorry for you and put money back into the team if he feels like you don't have enough money. But I don't know if that happens in this league or not. So if anyone has had that happen, I'd be interested to hear. So I suppose it's a possibility. All right, so let's jump into the software real quick. Take a look at how all this shakes out. So first of all, when you go to the front office tab, you have two tabs that are oriented towards finance. You have the finances tab, and then you have the accounting tab. I would recommend, if you're trying to figure this out on your own, and you're trying to take whatever I tell you and go back to your team and figure it out, focus on the finances tab. The accounting tab is it's important, and we'll cover that, but the finances tab is all you really need in order to figure out how you're doing from a monetary perspective. And these are the two most important numbers that you need to stay focused on, because it essentially tells you what your flexibility is. It tells you how much money you have to spend on players. I think we all know that. The reason why money for extensions is a little higher than money for free agents is because money for extensions don't start until next year. First of all, it's the same pool of money, right? These aren't two separate pools of money. So if I went and signed a $10 million player, my money for free agents would drop to 5,700,000 and change, and my money for extensions would drop to 16, or rather 6 million and change. It would subtract 10 million from both. It actually would subtract a little less than 10 million for money from free agents because it prorates the amount of money you've allocated to your player. So if you sign him halfway through the season, it'll only take 5 million, using 10 million as an example. Or if you trade for that player, it's only going to allocate 5 million, or rather take away 5 million because you're halfway through the season. So it does prorate that player's salary and subtracts it accordingly. So how do we get to this number? How's this number calculated? Well, if you come over to budget information, this is kind of where we see it break down. So first and foremost, here's my $92 million budget. But you can see that I've already gone over my budget. I'm currently spending, my current expenses are close to 100 million. And you can see that the game has calculated that I've gone over my budget by 7.5 million, and it's showing me that there. So in other words, I have zero room in my budget left. I've already spent all the money my owner gave me to spend for the year. And in fact, I've gone over that budget. And I can continue to go over that budget. And the reason is because I have cash. I have 27 million in cash lying around. So I've already allocated 7.5 million of that cash already, but I still have 19 million left over to spend for the rest of the year. So you might ask yourself, well, okay, you have 19 million, so why is your money for free agents only 15 million or close to 16 million? And the reason is because the money for free agents is restricted by the cap. So my current payroll is already at 84 million. So my money for free agents is less because I only have 15 million left before I hit the cap. So that's when assuming you have enough cash, assuming you have enough budget, and assuming you have enough cash, the most common wall you're going to hit in terms of the software telling you can't do that is if you go over the cap, go over the salary cap. And actually, I'm not sure if the software, I've never done that, so I'm not sure if the software enforces that or if Cleric enforces that, but you get the idea, right? It doesn't matter that I have more than 15 million. I mean, it's nice. I can carry that 5 million or that 4 million over to next year, but the cap is now restricting my ability to expand. So let's take a look at some other scenarios, and I'll use a spreadsheet for this. So here are the exact same numbers, right? My total expenses, my current budget, and my the fact that I've already gone over by 7 million in my cash, and it shows me my total money available. Well, let's go through some theoretical scenarios here. Let's just level set this for a minute. So now they're both the same. So instead of 27 million, why don't I expand this? Just in case you guys have trouble seeing this. So what if instead of 27 million, I had 10 million? Okay. I still would have been able to go over my $92 million budget, as you can see here. So I will have gone over my by 7.5 million, but I will only have $2 million available, which means my money for free agents, this thing right here, if I went to go sign a free agent, it would only be 2 million. So this goes back to what I was saying before, which is cash is king. And the reason cash is king is because it gives you flexibility to go over your budget, but still hit the salary cap potentially if you have enough cash. But in this case, because I don't have enough cash to go over the budget and pay for the extra expenses, I will be restricted to only hit about 86, 87 million, right? So back to the original question of, am I going to have enough money to spend on my team? It all depends. It all depends on how much cash you have lying around. and ultimately it's going to be the amount of cash that you need to get to 100% will depend on the size of your budget. So basically, the lower your budget is, the more cash you need to go over that budget. Okay, so that's basically the bottom line, but I'm going to go into a couple other things real quick if you're still interested. First and foremost, if we go to the accounting screen, I think the only real value of this screen, in my opinion, is first and foremost, we can see how much dead contract money we're paying out. That shows up under miscellaneous player expenses. So I cut 3 players this year. I signed a free agent for a little less than $1 million, and cut him. So that $1 million's in there. I cut Ernesto Figueroa, who's making $8 million a year. I cut him later in the season, so the bulk of this money is probably his. And then I cut Sanchez, who was making about $2.5 million. So the 3 of those players, with their prorated salaries, make up this player expenses total. And you can see next year for 2085, my miscellaneous player expenses is a nice clean $8 million, and that's Figueroa's contract. So he still had 2 years on his contract. And you can see for the next 2 years, 2085 and 2086, I still have that dead weight hanging around my team. I'm gonna have to pay that extra $8 million a year. It's not a problem if I'm getting good attendance and I'm getting good revenues. I can cover that $8 million and I'm still making cash. It's not that big of a deal. But here's another reason why the accounting screen is important: is you can see throughout the year the projected value here. It will forecast based on your attendance rates to date whether you're going to make a profit or a loss that year, and it'll show you that there. And because we're at the end of the season, my year-to-date number is the same as my projected number. But those will be different over the course of the season. And then the other reason why this is important is it gives you a sneak peek at what your budget's going to be next year. So I can see that my budget's going to go up by $10 million next year. I don't know if that's a forecast or a best guess, or whether that's committed. That might change, I'm guessing, but it's going to be about $100 million, which is fine. And the point is that I can get a sneak peek into whether I'm moving towards profitability or not. So based on what I'm seeing, I still have plenty of cash. I'm leaking cash a little bit right now, but I still have plenty of cash. I still have 28 million, give or take. So I'm not too worried about it. I think what I'll do next year is probably raise ticket prices by approximately 10%, just to try and get a little closer to break even. And then, as you can see, my player expenses drop off dramatically after next year. I've got about 25 million contracts that are ending next year, so things get a lot easier moving forward. So I think, to me, the accounting screen, really the primary goal or the primary benefit is just to keep an eye on kind of your profit and loss, and how much money you might be spending in miscellaneous player expenses. And it might even help you, if you're thinking about cutting someone, you can think about how much you're going to add to that, and factor that in as well. And let's see. And the last thing I wanted to do is just take a look at the league financial report. And we can take a look at, and based on what we've learned, we can take a look at some of the teams and get a feel for how much they're going to be able to spend next year. So most of the teams are already maxed out at cash. And as far as I'm concerned, teams that are maxed out at 40 million don't have to worry about finances. You got plenty of money. And unless you just auger your team in for a couple of years, I don't think you have anything to worry about. And in general, I would say that's the way it is. It seems to me that, financially, this league is set up to be fairly lenient, which I think is a good thing, in that it becomes more of a game of how do I allocate my 100 million, and less of a game of playing accountant, right? And I don't know if anyone wants to get to that level of micromanagement. And then we've got, here's a great example of a team that has unlimited money, right? Not only are the Baltimore Blue Sox sitting at 40 million in cash already, they're going to make another 40 million this year. So that's what this number is, this projected balance. It's labeled terribly, in my opinion. It should be called season profit or loss. But this is how much profit or loss you're going to make this year. This team's going to make this year. So, in other words, the Blue Sox could write off $40 million in salary right now, and it won't affect their cash balance for next year because this money is essentially getting thrown away. Because it is, it doesn't matter that they're going to go up to 80 million. The owner is going to take cash off the top anyway. Scrolling down to the Dockers, here is a team that's got a little more to think about. They are low on cash. They're going to be in the red next year. So they are essentially going to be constrained to whatever the budget is. So whatever, if their owner says you got 70 million next year, they got 70 million to spend. They're not going to have, assuming the owner doesn't inject more cash into that team, they're only going to be able to spend across scouting expenses, across, the scout salary, which is actually huge. His scout is making a ton of money, and the payroll clearly. They're going to be constrained to that. So let's say you take away, let's say he maxes out his scouting. So take away 16 mil. Let's make it 17 mil with some miscellaneous expenses. And he has about $70 million budget. He's only going to be able to build allocate about 62 million or so to his team. In other words, he may be he won't be able to bring on any more players next year, is my guess. Without dumping contracts. And again, I can't dive into his finances. I don't get that. I can't go to his accounting screen. But that's my take on it. So I'm not going to go through every team here. I think we covered 3 really good examples. Here's a middle of the road team. I would describe this team as most teams are in this situation. You have over 30 million in cash. You're profitable. You don't really have to worry about your finances. Baltimore Blue Sox, there's a few teams in a similar situation, just crushing it. Probably don't have to think about cash for a long, long time. And then you've got teams like the Boston Dockers that probably will be constrained to their budget for the next couple seasons at least until they start seeing some profitability. So I hope this was helpful. And I look forward to hearing your comments and feedback.